Tonight, a deal is struck between the UK and the EU. Has Keir Starmer finally got Brexit done? The post-Brexit reset deal means cutting red tape for goods and e-gate access for Brits queuing at airports. But in exchange, EU fishing rights in UK waters renewed for another 12 years, and talks are ongoing about freedom of movement for young people. Also tonight, trying to pave the way for an end to the war in Ukraine, a 2-hour call between Putin and Trump, described as frank and meaningful by the Russians, but still no ceasefire in sight. Well, back to Brexit. It's been a long journey and we've all got the scars on our backs. We'll bring you the craziest moments of a debate that's defined British politics. And we'll be joined by the always oven-ready Steve Baker and Caroline Flint. They'll be with us for the next hour. It's Monday. I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Brexit is back. A new trade deal has been announced after a late-night summit between the United Kingdom and the European Union. Of course, Keir Starmer wouldn't say Brexit is back. He would say this is the time to look forward to a new era. But look, with all the talk of fishermen and dynamic alignment, it certainly feels like Brexit is back. And that's a big risk for a government that's spent the last few years studiously avoiding talking about Brexit at all costs. Now that's changed, and the reason is that Number 10 is gambling that the country is also in a different place, that people don't want to reopen the painful wars of Brexit, the scars over fishing and following EU rules and everything else may not have healed over, but, they're not messy, weeping wounds anymore. They're gambling that the issues that made daily headlines and swung elections are not as totemic, particularly, of course, when you compare them to growth and inflation, things the government hopes this deal will help with.
This deal is a win-win. It delivers what the British public voted for last year. It gives us unprecedented access to the EU market, the best of any country outside of the EU or EFTA, all while sticking to the red lines in our manifesto.
There is just one point that needs making, though. Today's headline announcement was about making it a bit easier for Brits to use e-gates when travelling. There's stuff about what happens when you take your dog to France on holiday. Most of the really difficult stuff is still undecided, including a scheme to allow young people to work and travel more easily through Europe. The government may be right that some Brexit battlegrounds have been diluted more recently. But when it comes to immigration, well, it feels like immigration is just as totemic an issue as ever. This isn't the end of the negotiations, it's just the beginning. Our political editor, Beth Rigby, has tonight's first report from the UK-EU summit.
Brussels top brass here in London. Brexit battles behind us now.
Is this a EU-UK reset?
The EU and UK have clearly made up. Affection replacing acrimony in this new era of Anglo-EU relations. This UK-EU deal has been months in the making, and now the leaders are in there signing it off. Both sides will claim wins, but what is the UK giving up? And will the Prime Minister face a bit of a backlash? But at this Lancaster House gathering, all sides satisfied with this post-Brexit reset. The leaders today agree on a new security and defence partnership, which could give the UK defence sector access to a €150 billion rearmament pot. A new deal to remove red tape on food and drink exports and lift veterinary checks to cut long lorry queues at the borders. And a commitment to begin talks on a youth exchange scheme, but no concrete details yet. But controversially, a 4-year deal to allow EU boats to operate in British fishing grounds extended for another 12 years. In return, UK fishermen still allowed to sell their fish into the single market. After the formal agreement, the big sell.
Britain is back on the world stage, working with our partners, doing deals that will grow our economy and putting more money in the pockets of working people. It's time to move on from the stale old debates and political fights to focus on delivering common sense, practical solutions.
The warmth in this room and between these two genuine.
What we have agreed today is historic. It will make a real difference to people in the UK and across our union. But the message we are sending to the world today is equally, if not more important. We in Europe stick together.
You staked your reputation on getting this deal, and to nail it down, you have given the European Union 12-year access to UK fishing waters, and you have agreed, having ruled it out last year, in principle to a youth mobility scheme. There are those today criticising you for backsliding on Brexit. Don't they have a point?
This is a comprehensive agreement. It is balanced, reciprocal, and has huge benefits for the United Kingdom, based on our three principles, which is driving down bills, driving up jobs, and absolutely having control of our borders. I look at how does this impact on working people? What are those supermarkets saying? What are those businesses saying? Because they're all welcoming it.
To the Commission President, many Britons will welcome this deal, but what is your message to those who voted Brexit in the UK and view these new arrangements with suspicion?
This is a new beginning for old friends. In this spirit, we have designed the roadmap that we are working on together. The content shows that we are working towards a friendly cooperation that is of benefit for both sides of the channel.
The celebratory mood continued on a tour of HMS Sutherland, an anti-submarine warship moored on the Thames. For these leaders, all of this a symbol of their defence alliance. But others pointing to the battles ahead. The Conservatives already calling this deal a Brexit surrender.
This is a complete sellout. I am completely shocked that Keir Starmer has agreed to all of this, concession after concession. What he wants to do is just be able to say we're closer to the EU without working in the national interest. I do not think that this deal, there may be good things in it, but overall this is definitely not in the national interest.
Brexit has, for the past decade, defined the relationship between the European Union and the UK. And this today, then, this deal really is the beginning of a new era. It's been forged by a Prime Minister who is more instinctively pro-European, but it's also born out of necessity for both sides as they face into a more insecure world. This, then, is a new chapter. The big question is how it will be written in the coming months as two sides hammer out the details. The reset is now on in the spirit of reconciliation, but there will be hard bargaining ahead too. And Keir Starmer still needs to prove to the public this really is a win. Beth, Rigby, Sky News, London.
We'll be talking a bit more to Beth in a moment, but let's just get a bit more detail on the deal, shall we? Our economics editor, Ed Conway, has been crunching the numbers.
So the main thing Keir Starmer wants you to know about this, the UK-EU deal, is that it's a big deal. Lots of money generated by it for the economy. But does that really stack up? Here's how much the government says it's going to generate. £9 billion. That's the impact on GDP come 2040. So you've got to compare that with what is actual GDP to get a sense of how that compares. So here's actual GDP, and oh dear, it's bigger than the actual screen. We're going to have to change the scale on this. Look, we're going to squidge it back so you can see that's the actual GDP. And now we've squidged the axis. That's £4.1 trillion. That 9 billion looks a wee bit small, doesn't it? In fact, if you kind of work out what that is as a percentage of that, it's 0.2% of GDP. Not very big. Bigger, though, than the India deal, it should be said, which was 0.1% of GDP, but still relatively small in the scheme of things. And actually, if you take that 2%, so that's basically from the food standards, changing in food standards, emissions, they say that could generate this, £9 billion. Add on what you might generate from the youth mobility scheme. That's a really optimistic estimate, 0.45%. It might not get to that, but, you know, best case scenario. And then a few other things as well. You might, from all of the things that are being talked about in this deal, you might get to 0.8% of GDP benefits. How does that stack up, though? Because we've been told by lots of economists, you may not believe this stuff, but the economists say there will be a dent from Brexit. So does that make up for the dent? The short answer is no, because that, according to the Office of Budget Responsibility, is the dent. That's the impact of Brexit from having more friction in terms of trade. And when you take that away from that, you end up with that. So it is a net minus 3.2% of GDP rather than plus. The UK economy is smaller as a result of all of this when you take everything into account. There's all sorts of other parts to this, of course. So you've got what's happening to migration. So it'll be easier now as a student in the EU to work on a course in the UK. And that's mostly to address the fact that since those Brexit rules came into place, look at EU immigration. And this is all immigration, OK? But look at EU immigration. It's gone down a lot, whereas non-EU has gone up. And that holds as well, particularly for educational courses. So it's all about trying to bring EU migration up a little bit and this down a little bit. And then you've got other things as well. Fishing quotas turns out to be one of the biggest stories here. And those quotas, it's really complex, by the way. So what we've done here is we've taken lots of different species of fish and showed you broadly what's happened to those quotas since Brexit's come in. And broadly speaking, they have tended to come down a little bit. But the key point here is that those are now going to be set in stone. So the quotas basically stay where they are for the next 12 years. Final point to make, OK? A lot of what we've heard about from the Prime Minister, it sounds like it's very formal here, but the keynote within this document, and there's a whole host of words that we got released, the keynote here is to say, this is not legally binding. These are exploratory talks. And so although there's lots of talk about what's actually happening here, for the time being, we don't know if it's really going to be in black and white.
Ed Conway there. Well, let's reflect, shall we, on all of today with our political editor, Beth Rigby. So, Beth, Brexit is back.
It's back, baby.
It feels like it's something we've all kind of got PTSD over.
I did have some flashbacks last night as I was trying to tee up the day and sort of work out where this deal was going. And I was ringing around all my sources and everyone was saying it's going to the wire, nothing's agreed until everything's agreed. And it reminded me, Sophie, of being in the European Commission somewhere back in, I don't know, 2019 or 2017, actually maybe with Theresa May, and sleeping on the floor as the negotiations that were meant to finish at 10 p.m. went on until 7 a.m. and I had to do the clip with the Prime Minister, so I wasn't leaving. So, yes, it did have flashbacks of, like, last-minute Brexit negotiations when actually there is lots of horse trading with each side quite stuck in what they wanted. But, you know, they came to an agreement today. And, look, it's an agreement that the Prime Minister, I mean, he really needed this. He had set his stall on this reset, on this renegotiation. I would argue he probably needed it more than the European Union. I mean, I don't think there's loads of citizens across member states in the European Union thinking, goodness me, we expect a better deal on Brexit with London. So I think there was probably more jeopardy for him. And my goodness, the Europeans did really push him when it came to fishing rights in particular. But I would say in the broad contours of it, both sides can come out today and say that there's a sort of win-win situation.
And you've been speaking to someone in particular on this, haven't you? Just talk about that interview.
Yeah, so I've been speaking to Kaja Kallas, who is the High Representative for the Commission. She's one of the most senior diplomats, effectively, in the European Union. And when we talked about kind of where the win-wins are, for the UK, what was really important today was this Security and Defence Pact, because it means that the UK government should be, in theory, able to access this €150 billion rearmament pot that Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, announced earlier this year. It's designed to basically make the European Union and the European member states battle ready by 2030, an acknowledgement that they haven't really put enough into defence and Donald Trump is not the reliable partner that they perhaps thought he once was. Kallas has been leading some of these negotiations, so she really leads on defence. And I had an exchange with her today about what does this really mean? Can the UK really access this fund? It's really important for our defence sector. And also I asked her about whether she really thought the war in Ukraine might end this year in light of that Trump call with Putin today.
Let's listen.
It's been a historic day. The EU and UK have signed a security and defence partnership. Can you explain to our viewers what that is?
We are in this very, very difficult security environment if we look at the global sphere, and that's why it is very important that we cooperate together.
Key to this deal for Britain certainly was access to this 150 billion rearmament fund that the European Union is putting together. When do you think the UK might be able to access those funds?
Well, first of all, you know, the SAFE instrument has just been finalised between the institutions, but it also needs approval from the European Council. And when that is done, we also move on with implementation of that, and that is in coming months.
In the next month,
yes.
So before the end of the year.
Yeah, well, we don't really have time to waste, I think.
Yeah.
Again, looking at the global picture, we need to do more for our defence and we need to do more together.
And can I ask you, there has been some reports that there is a view amongst some European colleagues and allies that there should be a limitation on the amount the UK should be allowed to access of that fund, given that we are not in the European Union. Is that correct?
Of course, these discussions are there. We have the wounds from Brexit very clearly. I mean, you wanted to exit European Union.
President Trump is about to speak to President Putin. How optimistic are you about a quick deal? And how worried are you about Trump giving ground to Putin in order to end this war?
Well, we are now in over 60 days from the day where Ukraine agreed to unconditional ceasefire. We have seen Putin since then just playing games and putting new conditions and totally absurd conditions.
And President Costa spoke at the press conference today about a new round of sanctions on Russia. What might that look like? And is the EU doing enough? Because we've been doing sanctions for, you've been doing sanctions for more than 3 years, and it's not really working.
No, it's not true. The sanctions are working, otherwise Putin wouldn't always raise the question of raising the sanctions, because they have issues.
And just one more thing, President Trump keen to end the war in Ukraine. What's your view? Do you think it will end in the coming year?
Well, it takes 2 to 1 peace. It only takes 1 to 1 war, and we clearly see that Russia wants war. I wouldn't be as optimistic that it's possible to end this war very, very, very shortly. We have seen these attempts already for quite some time. But if Russia is really keeping to the goals to change the security architecture of Europe, to conquer Ukraine totally, then Ukraine just can't agree to these points. And that's why these attempts are not really serious, if it means to really say to the victim that you have to just give in.
It's a fascinating exchange there, Beth. Beth, you were obviously at the big summit news conference, and you decided when you were there to also ask about Gaza.
Yeah, I did ask about Gaza because obviously there are huge issues around the Israeli offensive there and aid not getting in. I put a question to the Prime Minister about this, but actually all 3 leaders chose to answer, which I wasn't expecting. I think we've got the exchange.
Let's listen.
It is a really serious, unacceptable, intolerable situation, and that's why we are working intensely to coordinate with other leaders how we respond to this, because it is intolerable, it is unacceptable, and we will continue to work in that way.
What did you make of it?
Well, it was interesting in the room because the question I actually asked the Prime Minister was linked to what someone in the UN had said, the aid chief, about this, about asking the Security Council whether it would, to quote him, prevent genocide by taking action in the Gaza Strip. And I asked the Prime Minister whether he agreed with that language of genocide and could he in good conscience stand there and say that he thought he had done enough. And that was the answer you saw. Ursula von der Leyen and then Mr Costa the President of the Council, also chose to answer this question much along the lines of Keir Starmer. And I think what was interesting in the room, Sophie, was when I asked the question, all three leaders seemed to want to answer it, and also the room really did. It did sort of drop silent, which I think, and in the way they answered it, I think it expressed the frustration that they are clearly feeling. And in the past half hour or so, the UK and others have threatened Israel with concrete action if the offensive on Gaza is not stopped and aid not allowed in. So this is very much a moving story.
It's interesting that you felt was something that they all wanted to respond to there. Beth, thank you very much indeed. Beth Rigby, thanks. Well, returning to that deal with the EU now, I spoke to the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, just before coming on air. Thank you very much for being with us. So how big of a deal is today?
Look, this is a good deal for the UK, for British jobs, for British workers, for our borders, and builds off the back of a good deal with India, a good deal with the United States, and now a good deal with the European Union. So
if it's such a good deal, what part of the deal makes the UK better off than it was before Brexit?
Well, since Brexit, because of course we left the European Union, there's a whole host of things in the deal today which are building on the trading agreement that Boris Johnson gave us.
So that's nothing then, isn't it?
Well, no, there's a whole host of things that have gotten better on food and drink exports, on being able
Brexit,
to use...
not before Brexit.
Yeah, but we're not litigating, are we, the referendum? We left the EU, we were landed with a rubbish trade deal under Boris Johnson, and we've significantly improved it today. And that's good news for British business, but also for people going on holiday, as well as for people going to the shops and seeing more produce at lower prices. I mean, that's to be welcomed.
Can I be honest? Looking through it, it feels like a lot of this is low-hanging fruit. We talk about e-gates, or how easy it is to take your dog on holiday to France. There's nothing on services. You haven't managed to get a youth mobility scheme over the line. I mean, it feels like all the difficult stuff is still to come.
Well, this is the start, not the end. We've committed to an annual meeting of the EU-UK summit to be able to build on this, but I wouldn't write off...
An annual meeting?
Well, and the work that happens between them. I mean, you don't just rock up and shake hands, of course, there's work in the middle. But I wouldn't write off the fact that people can get on their holiday much more quickly and get home much more quickly, that they can take their pets with them, that they'll have lower priced food in the shop with a more range of options. I mean, these are everyday economy things, but I think they're important to people and how they go about their livelihoods, and that should be welcome.
You can see what I'm talking about, though, with low-hanging fruit. On e-gates, it doesn't even say that Brits can automatically use EU queues. It has to be signed off by member states. Or on trade, and I appreciate that there is important stuff that's been signed on trade, but there's nothing on services. There's nothing on mobility. It does feel like this is the easy stuff.
They're important changes. As I say, building off the US and the India trade deal and all the other things that we're doing to improve the conditions for businesses and workers in the UK. Now, it's great that you want more, I want more, and we're going to want to try to do more in the future to improve our trading and security relationships. Of course we are. But the fact is, all of the things that were announced today, the last government failed to get any agreement on. That was making food more expensive, making it harder for British businesses, making it harder to control our borders, and making it harder for people to get on holiday and to come home. And we've been able to fix that today.
How much will today's announcement boost growth by?
So the estimate is around £90 billion by 2040. That's looking at some of the aspects of the deal today. But look, there's more to do. And of course, we want businesses to be able to think about exporting into the European market again, like they used to in the past, if they don't do so today.
I mean, it sounds like a big number, but in percentage increase terms, it's pretty low. I mean, it's the amount that could be wiped out by a Donald Trump press conference.
Hey, don't turn down any growth. Look, growth is a good thing. Making it easier for businesses to export is a good thing. Being able to reduce costs in the shop is a good thing. I'm not sure there's any genuine actual criticism for the deal today, but of course, would you like us to go further? Yeah, sure.
Would you like to go further?
Of course, there are things we want to continue to work on. It's in the agreement today, and there's more for us to be able to partner on.
While I have you, it feels like I'm very keen to talk about the spending review that's coming up as well, something that will impact our viewers so dramatically, of course, and everyone in the country. Are you looking at potential changes to the cut in winter fuel payments?
So I'm midway through the spending review at the moment, and so I can't tell you anything about it until I've done it, but I'll promise to come back to the studio to talk to you on the 11th of June and after that when we've published the details. And as you would expect, I'm not going to give a running commentary on private negotiations in government. So the policy that exists today is the policy that stands, and as I say, on the spending review, I'll be able to come back once I've presented it to Parliament in the proper way and go through the numbers with you at that stage.
The Sunday Times says you're running focus groups to see about potential changes to winter fuel payments. Is that correct?
I don't know. I don't run focus groups, but what I do is negotiate the spending review. And as I say, I'll come back to talk about that once we've finalised all of the agreements and presented it to Parliament.
Are you going to give me exactly the same answer if I ask you about disability benefit cuts as well?
Yeah, because it's an important principle, right, that when I'm having discussions with secretaries of state and with others in government, in mid-negotiation, where we're having to make lots of big choices for the country, that we don't provide a running commentary on TV for that. And as you would expect, that when we've concluded that, we should present it to Parliament first and then to the country. But I'll happily come back and talk about the detail at that stage.
I'll hold you to that, obviously.
No, sure.
But that's a different answer, I have to say, to the one that I've been given by other members of the Cabinet when I've asked exactly the same question on winter fuel and disability in the last couple of weeks. And for that, you know, the journalist in me, the ears prick up and you start thinking, something's moving.
So my answer, that I can talk to you about the spending review when I've published it, is the right answer, and that's the government's position.
So they were wrong to say that there'd be no change to the policy then?
The spending review is the spending review. It will conclude on the 11th of June.
The thing is, and I understand why you're saying that, but you know, these are people's lives that we're talking about as well. You know, the disability cuts, for example, your own impact assessment, saying we'll put an extra 50,000 children into relative poverty. People are worried about this. That's why I'm asking these questions, because people are talking about it and they're looking to you, who's got control over it, to give them a bit of reassurance, I suppose.
Sure.
Because a month is a long time.
Yeah, and I totally get that, and I empathise with it and understand. But that's why it's important that you do these things in the proper way. At the moment, we're just negotiating the budgets for each department. Things will come at a later stage, like the child poverty strategy, for example, where we want to take really significant decisions to try to get to the structural causes of child poverty across the country. Of course, we've got a welfare bill coming before Parliament shortly, which will be debated in Parliament with MPs when it's published. So there's a lot of things outside of the spending review that will be happening over the next couple of months. But your question was about the spending review, which is what I'm responsible for. But as I say, I can't give a running commentary on that.
There was quite a lot of backlash to a comparison you made about disability cuts, saying it's like taking pocket money away from your children, cutting someone's pocket money by £10 a week and not taking into account that they got a Saturday job at the same time. How did it make you feel when people felt you were being dismissive, right?
Yeah, look, I've apologised for that because it was the wrong analogy, and it actually wasn't about social security payments. It was about the methodology of the impact assessment. So when you read it in context, it's actually about that. But as I said at the time, I was trying to explain a pretty mundane procedural thing in a way that made sense to people. And I chose the wrong words to do that, and I apologise for it.
Were you upset by some of the reaction to it?
I was upset that I made the mistake because I'm normally pretty good when I come onto TV, and I don't want to offend people if that's not who I am and what my values are. So I was annoyed with myself, but we all make mistakes sometimes.
OK. Just finally, Gary Lineker is stepping down early from the BBC. He apologised for sharing a post with an anti-Semitic image on it. Do you think it was a mistake for him to talk about Gaza at all, given that he was employed by the BBC? Or do you have a bit of sympathy with presenters or media personalities who want to express themselves?
Look, that's a question for Gary Lineker. Clearly, there are guidelines in place, and it's for organisations like the BBC to decide how they want to implement those in line with impartiality rules. But I'm really not qualified to be commenting on those discussions, or indeed football. So I hope you don't go there next.
Are you a football fan?
I know nothing about football whatsoever. You should get the Prime Minister on if you want to talk about that.
So you're not going to miss him on Match of the Day, then?
I've never watched it, I'm afraid. But I've seen his podcasts are great, and I've seen him on other shows, and I'm sure he'll have a brilliant career, even though he's now left the BBC.
OK, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Well, there we had the government. Let's get the view of the opposition, shall we? We're joined now by the Shadow Business and Trade Secretary, that is Andrew Griffith. Good to have you with us. So we've heard your lines about the deal. Kevin Badenoch, the Conservatives, not very happy with it. What specifically would you change?
Well, look, first of all, because we've had a lot of detail, or a lot of noise, not much detail. I mean, if you step back from it, tomorrow, after this deal, the EU is going to have more control over our rules. We're going to go back to making a bigger financial contribution to the European Union. They're certainly going to have more access to our fishing for 12 years, which I don't think anybody expected or thought was a good idea. And we're going to have things like the European Court of Justice have some domain that's going to drive up things like the cost of energy, and they're going to be the people setting some of our standards. So it's definitely, to me, Sophie, it takes us backwards rather than forwards. It actually takes us back to the point, that's Westminster over there behind you. I mean, we'd got to a place where we knew where all of our rules were coming from. In a democracy, no one's going to love all of them. Now we're going back to a place where some of those rules will be made in Westminster, some will be made in Brussels. And I don't think that's a good thing for anybody.
I guess the issue is, right, in any negotiation, you have to compromise, right? That's the truth of it. No one's going to go in getting everything you want, right? So, my first question was, what would you change about the deal? I guess perhaps the better question is, what would you be prepared to compromise on if you were in the negotiation chair? Because those are the tough decisions you've got to make in politics.
Yeah, and the real thing that I say with real bemusement is I'm actually not sure what the UK government have got from this deal. It's much clearer what they've lost, the fishing, the fact we're going to pay in.
Well, they have got some things from the deal, though, haven't they?
Well, 0.02, I think you showed a chart earlier. I think it's 0.02% of GDP. And look, I don't sniff at anything that helps grow is a good thing. If we can remove some of the frictions,
but they have got some things in return for it, haven't
give an
they?
example.
Right?
I mean,
So
the ability for EU companies.
I'm just trying to get it out.
Your interview. Sorry.
They have what they would say is that they've got better e-gate admission.
But many countries already let Brits use e-gates, so they would say that.
That is what they would say. They'd
Okay.
also say that they have allowed more food and
more
stuff
food
like that.
imports from Europe. We import more food from Europe. So if you make that, I mean, it's
So they've
fine.
made it
removing friction is good.
Removing friction
and
for trade that would
supermarkets
benefit
welcome
it. They've
that.
been, exactly.
Yeah, but they are importing more food, so it doesn't help British farmers, doesn't create British jobs.
But
it
what
means
it
it's
does
easier.
do is it makes it easier for food to be traded between the EU and the UK, and that
but
could
most of that
help
comes in rather than
drive
goes
down,
out.
Prices in supermarkets as well, right? And that they've also said that it would help on things like the steel industry and that kind of thing too, right? So they said that they have got some wins and they have got an increased projection in growth, although I accept your point that everyone would like to see more, right?
Yeah, so we would not have done this deal. And actually, we would not have done anything like this deal. We set out red lines. And these are because I want the economy to grow and because I want people to be better off, not for any other reason. Going back to that point of being a rule taker, so French politicians in Brussels will be deciding British rules. If you look at energy, we've all been recoiling for higher energy costs. The fact that the UK is going to link what's called the energy trading scheme with exactly the same one in Europe, but where Europe set the rules and the prices are higher, is, as a piece of maths, going to cost every household and every British business more in their energy costs. I don't think that's a good thing. I would not have made that trade. The Conservatives will repeal this deal and not do this deal.
It's pretty clear that you wouldn't sign this deal off. It doesn't meet your red lines. But is that the problem? You tried to do a US trade deal. You didn't get it over the line. It was the Starmer government that got the India trade deal over the line. They've got this trade deal with the EU over the line. Maybe that's a problem. Don't you need to do those compromises in order to get...
You can get anything over the line if you go in and
or you can get nothing over the line.
and give up, right? And the government's gone at this with haste. And they actually put its, in some cases, like Europe, its body language was all wrong, right? They were saying they were going to get a deal even before they'd got into the room. And that's not the way to negotiate. How on earth did we end up with 12 years on fish? Right? None of the briefings, none of your contacts will have said that the sweet spot for a deal around giving up British fishing rights was 12 years. But if you put yourself in a position that you voted 48 times against the Brexit referendum, you've campaigned, you've put in the Labour manifesto, you haven't really got an awful lot of ability to walk away. It's not the idea of trade deals, to be clear. Good deals with India, where most of the work was done with us. I hope that this government gets a deal with the Gulf, which was, again, a deal that was left almost ready to sign when we left office. And the deal with the US, again, absolutely not criticising the fact that they're in the room. Actually in the room, you can only do that if you're an independent sovereign country. And today's deal makes that harder. Because now, if Keir Starmer goes into the Oval Office and wants to talk about agriculture with his US counterpart or the president, he's actually got to get on the phone to Ursula von der Leyen and say, is that OK? Because he's just signed up to have Brussels set the rules for our food standards rather than the UK.
Alan Sugar today has tweeted he's pleased about the deal, but he says we need to reinstate free circulation of goods. Please, Keir, try to rejoin the EU. What do you say to that?
Well, maybe we'd have got a better deal if Alan Sugar was negotiating it, because I do genuinely think the government has done a terrible job of negotiation. He's literally come away, having given away 12 years, which I'm not sure was even an ask in terms of fishing, and just got very, very little in return. So maybe he needs to send for Alan Sugar. Maybe he would rejoin the EU. Maybe he would do a...
Do you think that would be better?
I mean, Look, I've no idea, but I don't think we should be rejoining the EU. I think it's the countries that are going to succeed in the world we're in, a fast-changing world, are those that are agile, that have the control of their own ability to set their rules, their own way to run their economy. Tying ourselves to any one partner, but particularly one that's quite sclerotic in terms of its growth, and with 28 or 27 other countries all trying to make decisions at the same time, that doesn't feel like the modern world that we should be in.
OK, thank you very much indeed, Andrew Griffith, speaking to us there. Now, all the while Keir Starmer is storming the world stage, the Prime Minister's been facing a pretty simmering backlash from some of his own MPs when it comes to his domestic agenda. He hot-footed it from his EU summit to address the Parliamentary Labour Party. So let's try and find out what happened. Our political correspondent Liz Bates was there for us. She has all the details. Liz, what's going on?
Yes, I do have all the details. So the Parliamentary Labour Party is a meeting where all the Labour MPs pile into a committee room here in Parliament, and as journalists we go and hang around outside and try to guess the mood from what they look like as they're going in, and we get them to text us to tell us what is going on inside that room. It's not very scientific, but we do get some quite good information about it. So first of all, today's meeting, I think, probably more positive than many were expecting because of the EU trade deal. A lot of Labour MPs quite happy with that. The Prime Minister talked quite extensively about that, but a few issues on the domestic front that I think are going to cause him problems, already are causing him problems and could continue to in the future. So a few MPs raised the issue of the winter fuel payment and that becoming means tested, and the cuts to disability benefits, the personal independence payment. What those MPs were saying in the room to the Prime Minister was, look, we understand why you did this, but this is causing us a lot of problems on the doorstep. It's becoming a distraction to this government. Please, will you have a rethink, particularly on that winter fuel payment threshold? So we'll see what happens with that. Another issue, Diane Abbott, pretty rebellious backbench Labour MP, very prominent during the Corbyn era, of course, not a huge fan of Keir Starmer. She raised his language last week about immigration, the island of strangers. She was not happy with that. The other issue that came up, Gaza, unsurprisingly, lots of MPs want the UK government to take a stance on this, and the Prime Minister did talk at length about that as well and talked about the urgent need to get food in. Now, Sophie, the way that we get a sense of the general mood outside, again, a little bit ridiculous, but the sound, the noise, the loudness of the desk banging, and I can tell you tonight that that was medium to quite loud. So broadly positive for the government, but a few issues on the horizon that are going to keep causing them problems.
Liz, thank you very much indeed. Liz Bates there speaking to us from Parliament's Central Lobby. Right, let's bring in a duo for the evening, shall we? The former Conservative Minister Steve Baker and the former Labour Minister Caroline Flint. Great to have you both with us. So I'm really interested to get your view on this Brexit deal, because, you know, we've had the spin from the government, we've had the spin from the opposition. Both of you, it feels like, are people who normally speak their minds in these things. I think it's fair to say. Caroline, what do you make of it?
Well, I think, you know, Keir Starmer and the government will be pleased that they've had a sort of series of deals that they've struck with India and the US and now today the EU. And actually, I think in terms of some of the things that have come out, it seem to be sensible. I mean, the truth is the last agreement was struck with Boris Johnson in December 2020, and that led to the next 5 years, and this was due to come up for review in 2025. So, to a certain extent, being less partisan about it, some of these issues around, you know, vets and everything else were probably under discussion under Rishi Sunak as well. But actually, Keir Starmer's brought it home. But it's not without risks, I would say, for Keir Starmer. I mean, as Ed and others were saying earlier on, when you look at it all as a package in terms of growth, it's growth, but it's not massive. There's a lot more that the government's going to have to do for their growth agenda. But also, no doubt, the Conservatives and Reform will point to the rule taker rather than the rule maker side of this. And then the other issue I would say is that, you know, could be an issue for them is on the youth mobility. There's questions about what will be the age threshold at which it will stop. I think when you talk about youth, you usually think, you know, under 25. If it goes above that, what will be the outcome of that?
So 30's too old. Over the hill at 30.
Yeah, well, sorry about that, all you over 25s out there. But the truth is, it creates a different dynamic, and therefore, how many of those young people will be allowed in? How does it sit with Keir Starmer's ambition, which I absolutely agree with, which is we should be creating more jobs for young people in this country of working age who currently aren't in work. So there are still risks for him, but he will be looking at trying to get beyond his pre-Brexit position, which of course was completely different to what it is today.
Oh, that's one way of putting it. Steve, what do you make of it?
I think that Keir Starmer's done what I would expect. He's sat down on the EU side of the negotiating table and mostly given them things that, of course, they will like. But, you know, for example, on agri-food, of course, you're right that Caroline's right, that under the Conservative government, we would have liked to have reduced checks and had easier transport for pets and other animals. We'd like to have mutual recognition of qualifications or make it easier for touring musicians and so forth. But how you do it really matters. So, for example, on agri-food, the EU agreed with New Zealand a deal based on mutual recognition and equivalence. And that is capable of getting rid of a large number of checks. But instead, we've put ourselves effectively in the single market for agri-food. So we'll be now subject to EU rules and EU judgments. But that in itself, it's not really a compromise. It's a repudiation of the principle that leaving meant being outside the political and legal jurisdiction of the EU. And that's why people are calling that a betrayal. We've done the same on emissions trading, which effectively not only puts our energy bills up by, I think it's going to be 2.4 billion a year in total on energy bills. It also effectively hands the EU control of our energy and net zero policy. And these are not good things. For our rules to be made by other people with other interests can't be a good thing.
Is there an issue here where, because it feels like, you know, sometimes if you listen to people who say that this is a betrayal and have, you know, very well thought out reasons for why they don't like it, that is the hands that we've got now, you know, and there's no point saying, why isn't the EU giving us a great deal? Like, why should they? We're the smaller party.
Well, I voted for the Theresa May deal, which probably Steve voted was against, and Keir Starmer was against, so you two were in the same camp at that point. But, I mean, look, I think we just got to be sensible about this. You know, Keir Starmer has got red lines. One is no return to free movement. No single market, no customs union. On the food side of things, in terms of the standards, to be honest, I think we've always been in the front of actually most food standards anyway. And what's really interesting, I think, is how Keir Starmer's managed to pull off a food-related deal with the US in terms of imports of beef and what have you, without lowering our standards, so that he can have this agreement with the EU. And you know, let's be honest, the British burger is now going to be available, apparently, in the EU in a way it wasn't before. So I think some of these are sensible options, as is the security and defence. I think one thing of the things I think are missing from the security on the crime side, in terms of facial recognition, DNA and fingerprints, is I think we would want to see, in terms of dealing with illegal immigration, access to the information about failed asylum seekers across Europe who come across here to claim asylum.
I feel like Steve's going to explode if we don't let him.
I'll try not to explode. I think it is normal for our free trade agreements, certainly CPTPP, Australia, New Zealand, it's normal for them to commit to us having control of our own regulatory regime. So by handing over control of our regulatory regime to the European Union, that puts us at risk immediately of suffering litigation under each of those free trade agreements' dispute resolution mechanism. Now, the BBC are reporting that there's a slight get-out that we'll be able to diverge as long as we maintain similar standards and it doesn't divert EU trade. But that feels to me like an attempt to comply with our FTA obligations. But what it really means is uncertainty, because all of that, I feel confident, will be tested under all of those litigation mechanisms to see whether it is compatible. And I bet we'll find it's not.
But the thing is that, again, you know, on the one hand, you know, the Conservatives, and you sort of had Andrew Griffith earlier on saying it's really not going to affect growth, it's a tiny deal, this sort of thing. On the other hand, we're having doom and gloom from Camille Badenoch and others saying this is terrible, we're relinquishing everything. I think it's, in some ways, it's got some relatively, I think, sensible, logical outcomes. I don't think it stops us having trade deals with America or other countries around the world. And in some ways, that's a sweet spot for the UK to be going forward. And if you're ruling out a single market, the customs union and free movement going back to, then in that sense, you know, it is a different world we're living in today. It is not going back to where we were before. And I say that as someone who campaigned for Remain, but just thought we should respect the outcome of the vote and wanted a moderate position. I think this is a pretty moderate position.
What have you written in your book?
Two things. First,
she's wrong.
No.
No, he didn't. No, he didn't.
There's so much to say. One must prioritise. President Trump's trying to achieve many things with the brute politics of his tariff policy, but one of those things is to try to deal with a decades' worth of accumulated non-tariff barriers to US trade with the rest of the world. Among those non-tariff barriers are the European Union's unscientific agri-food rules, which we just opted back into. So it's going to be very interesting to see what the White House now says over the next few days, because we've just chosen to opt into what they're trying to get rid of with punitive tariffs.
Okay.
And now, that's really no good. The other point is, being unscientific, the EU's rules will be subject to challenge by our trading partners. It's a mess.
You're right to prioritise, because we are now out of time, but there'll be lots more from both of you throughout the programme. Good to have you with us. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, a 2-hour phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, but is a ceasefire any closer?
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Hello, welcome back. Well, Donald Trump says his 2-hour long call with Vladimir Putin today went very well, but the Russian president still refuses a ceasefire and says the most effective path towards peace is still to be determined. Well, let's talk now to our US correspondent, James Matthews, who joins us now from Washington. James, what did you make of the readouts?
Hi, Sophie. Pretty pessimistic, I think, actually. I think from Putin we got more obfuscation. It was a kind of Moscow fudge, which won't taste great in Kyiv or in allied European capitals. You know, he's talking about, yeah, ceasefire if we reach an agreement, very much knocking it into the never-never, as he has done throughout Vladimir Putin. So, you know, playing a sideways pass in Moscow. Here we had Donald Trump's version of events on Truth Social. And for me, I mean, he's taking a big step back from the whole process, speaking about how it was a great phone call, he said, you know, very good, but negotiations on a ceasefire and an end to the war were now going to be a job for the two parties. So, you know, this is a discussion and a negotiation which has had the United States as the chief steward, absolute broker in all of this. the United States presented a plan. That was on the table, a plan for peace. So Donald Trump was all over it. This situation, this conflict that he said, remember, he would solve in a day. Looking at this Truth Social tweet, I think today is the day when he says, look, you're on your own. He speaks about the two sides being involved in discussions, then goes on to talk about trade opportunities, large scale, between the United States and Russia. Says that Ukraine has trade opportunities in the rebuilding of its country as well. He makes no mention of his frustrations, which he has expressed recently about the intensive Russian bombing. He makes no mention of the sanctions on Russia that he had threatened if Putin continued with his attacks. So, you know, this was a president who was upping the ante on Russia. I think we got to a point, Sophie, where it was no longer a discussion with Putin on friendly terms. He had to wield the stick, having fed Putin the carrot, and he stopped short of that. And quite what they make of it in Kyiv and in allied European capitals, you know, I don't know. They will not be pleased. Frankly, I think there will be frantic calls to the White House from London, Paris and everywhere else to see exactly where they stand, because right now it looks like they stand alone.
James, it's always so interesting to talk to you and to get your take on what is happening from Washington. Thank you very much. Still to come on the Politics Hub. With the EU taking over the political agenda today, there's a distinct sense of déjà vu about. We'll take a look back at the twists and turns of the debate around leaving the EU. Stay with us if you can bear it.
Paris reverberated to the sights, sounds and smells of conflict.
There's a focal point to all this anger, and that is Emmanuel Macron.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
There are dozens of people desperately clambering to get onto that boat. It is a chaotic scene, but it's being watched by dozens of French police officers on the beach.
I've reported on migration across Europe, close up on the ground, understanding that sense of desperation and meeting the criminal gangs behind it.
This old fishing boat set off from the Libyan port of Tobruk. There were 606 people who were on board.
So we've been distributing life jackets to all the people on board this boat, and now the first person is coming on board.
This is the ugly side of Italian football.
In Italy, everything is really organized.
Football's problems with hooliganism, racism were just dormant, and now they're back and they're getting worse. We cover so many countries, languages and cultures and work hard to gain trust to bring you the full story first.
Help is slowly reaching these places.
It's not just homes, but whole streets like this one that have been reduced to rubble and dust.
This is a picture of destruction.
Everywhere you look in this mountaintop community, there is absolute devastation.
These are the settlers in waiting, keen to start a new life, to annex Gaza for Israel.
The least we can do is just kick them out of our land.
Gaza, which is just 2 miles in that direction, is under attack again. Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first. Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, the UK's relationship with the EU is back on today's agenda, although let's be honest, it's never really left, has it? It's been almost 9 years since the decision to Brexit away from the EU. 9 years of oven-ready deals, prorogue in Parliament, Brexit hardmen, and all of us at times losing our collective minds. Let's take a look back at the good, the bad, and the ugly from when we all went a bit balmy over Brexit.
Brexit
Brexited
means Brexit.
If you're a fraud, Nigel, go back down the river, because you're up one without a canoe.
I am not prepared to delay Brexit any further.
We have an oven-ready deal, ready to go.
Close the door!
Suspending Parliament is not acceptable. It's not on.
How are you feeling tonight?
Well, everybody knows I'm Brexit hardman Steve Baker.
There it is. The UK has left the European Union. 47 years of history brought to an end.
Well, let's bring back in Caroline and Steve, shall we? How does it make you feel? Like,
Well, that was
back
the worst mistake I ever made. It was a joke at my own expense. It was supposed to be self-deprecating. A journalist had said it in the morning. It was a terrible mistake. I certainly learned, do not try and be funny in the midst of a crisis.
Yeah, I guess that is true.
Because everybody uses it.
But people, I mean, in an affectionate way on Politics Hub.
Well, thank you. That's great. That makes it up for it all, of course.
I mean, we all still have the scars, though, don't we? Right? Yes. It's been an extraordinary.
Oh, it was a terrible time. I mean, I think in terms of looking at how Parliament behaved during that time on both sides of this argument, it was a disgrace because truth being is from 2015 to 2019. Lots of other big issues that affect people across this country were not getting the attention they deserved. As, you know, Uber, you know, leavers and Uber remainers just took lumps out of each other.
Well, I mean, the constitutional question, wherever it may be, always excites the strongest passions. You know, I was Minister of State for Northern Ireland, and I can tell your viewers that any day in Northern Ireland, the preeminent issue in the minds of politicians in Northern Ireland on the two main sides is always going to be the constitutional question, because it is effective. It's settled by the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, but that means there's a trapdoor under part of our country. And that means unionists every day are concerned to keep Northern Ireland in the Union. And the constitutional question will always excite the most strong emotions.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, again, we look at what's happened since. I mean, for, you know, again, the promises of what would be achieved under Boris Johnson. I get your point you said earlier when we were about the pandemic, but I don't think that's enough as an excuse for what then happened in terms of, you know, getting to grips with things. I mean, the fact is under Boris Johnson, they relaxed the visa control. And therefore, in 1 year, I think 2022, we had 1.3 million people come in through relaxed visas from outside the EU. So that's why net migration went up, and they absolutely failed on that score.
I think it's one of those things where it's just so easy with Brexit to get immediately into these quite complicated arguments on all kinds of different things. I think it's definitely been reflected today. And thank you for a very grown-up chat on the balminess of Brexit. We appreciate it, and it's great to have you.
You think it's all over?
Oh, it's never all over.
It's never all over.
That's the one thing we definitely know on Brexit. It's never finished. Thanks
Thank you
very much indeed. That is it from us tonight, but I'll see you tomorrow at 7. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah Jane Lee. I'm sure she's going to have lots of Brexit joys for you as well to look forward to.